For the first 2 decades of the 21st century, global energy markets operated on one straightforward, undisputed axiom. Chinese economic expansion was the ultimate engine of global oil demand. When China grew, its insatiable appetite for crude dictated the baseline pricing for the entire world. Then came 2022. Global supply chains fractured. Sanctions crippled Russian energy exports. The Middle East grew volatile. According to every traditional macroeconomic model, this unprecedented supply shock should have triggered an uncontrollable upward price spiral, locking crude oil well above the $100 threshold and plunging the world into a devastating commodity supercycle. Yet, reality defied the textbooks. The math broke, and the supercycle never materialized. The reason it failed to materialize isn't found in supply-side interventions or temporary cyclical downturns. It happened because precisely when the global oil supply was at its absolute weakest, a massive, silent counter-narrative emerged. The trajectory of Chinese oil consumption permanently decoupled from its economic output. What we are actually looking at is the masterclass in structural demand destruction, a deliberate, rapid substitution of energy that erased millions of barrels of projected daily demand from the global ledger, unexpectedly turning the Chinese energy transition into the ultimate macroscopic shock absorber for the global economy.
To really see what that macroeconomic shock absorber looks like on the ground, you really have to picture the G4 Expressway, specifically during the Golden Week holiday.
Right, which is just a massive travel period, yeah.
Oh, it's historically the single largest annual human migration on the planet. I mean, the asphalt is essentially this crawling river of metal. And we're going to dive into the experience of a gas station owner there, a guy named Chen.
Okay, so paint that picture for us. Where exactly is he?
So his station is massive. It's sitting right on this vital artery. And he's standing there under these glaring fluorescent lights, just watching the traffic.
Just a wall of cars.
Exactly. The highway is just as packed as it was, say, a decade ago. But here's the thing. His fuel pumps are eerily quiet.
Eerily quiet during the biggest travel week of the year.
Yeah. And he recalls the situation back in 2008 during these same holidays. I mean, there were miles-long queues, actual literal fuel shortages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He had desperate truck drivers trying to bribe him just to get their tanks filled. But now, he's watching this endless sea of vehicles with green license plates glide right past his station.
Green license plates, so that's the designation for new energy vehicles over there, right?
Full electrics and plug-in hybrids. And they are completely silent. They're heavy with batteries, and they are just utterly indifferent to his gasoline.
That has to be such a surreal feeling for a guy selling gas.
I mean, there's this bizarre disconnect. On his phone, a financial news alert is flashing about geopolitical tensions, threatening $100 crude, right? Central banks panicking globally.
While he's just standing there.
Standing right over his underground tanks, which are filled to the absolute brim with unsold 95-octane gasoline. It's like he's feeling this bizarre, hollow numbness.
Pressing his hand against a cold, idle gas nozzle.
He feels like a living fossil watching his own extinction. The global markets are bracing for an apocalyptic oil shock. But right there, in the industrial heart of the world's biggest crude importer,
the underlying thirst for petroleum has simply evaporated.
It just isn't there anymore.
That image of the silent gas station completely rewrites the physics of transportation. I mean, we're all conditioned to believe that more cars on the road automatically equals more liquid fuel burn.
Right, that's the traditional math.
But to grasp the sheer scale of what this station owner is witnessing, we have to look at the staggering electrification numbers from this deep dive.
Let's hear them because they are wild.
So looking at the 2024 data, new energy vehicles accounted for 48% of all new vehicle sales in the country.
Nearly half.
Nearly half of everything. But if you filter that down to just passenger cars, taking out the commercial vans and stuff.
Right, the daily drivers.
The number actually crossed the 50% threshold. Over half of all new passenger cars hitting the road don't rely primarily on gasoline.
Which is a reality that, honestly, it surpassed the government's own really ambitious 2030 target by a full 6 years.
6 years early.
We aren't talking about early adopters anymore or, a niche market of tech enthusiasts. This is the rapid wholesale replacement of the internal combustion engine.
For a population of 1.4 billion people.
And the reason it happened so quickly, it really comes down to how the physical landscape was terraformed to support it. I mean, it's one thing for factories to churn out millions of batteries, right?
Sure, you can build the cars.
But it is an entirely different macroeconomic beast to build the nervous system required to keep those batteries moving across a continent-sized nation. By the end of 2025, the infrastructure reality comprises over 18 million charging points.
18 million. I really want to pause on that figure for you listening because the scale is just difficult to process. In many Western countries, EV adoption stalls because the charging infrastructure is highly localized, right? It's clustered in wealthy urban enclaves, tech hubs, coastal cities.
Yeah, and if you leave those zones, you are suddenly in a total charging desert.
But the strategy here was completely different. The penetration is incredibly deep and systematic. The data shows that 98% of highway service stations across their vast expressway network are equipped with charging pillars.
98%. When you understand that figure, the silence at Chen's gas station makes perfect sense.
It does. They deployed this infrastructure with a clear recognition that for electrification to work on a macro scale, the grid had to precede the demand.
Right. You can't ask consumers to buy the car and promise the charger will come later.
Never works. They essentially built a parallel energy delivery system right alongside the old petroleum arteries,
which ensures that range anxiety simply doesn't exist for the vast majority of drivers on major routes.
But, looking at the information here, there's something fascinating about that concept of range anxiety.
Oh, the hidden catalyst.
Having chargers at 98% of service stations is a monumental feat of engineering, sure, but there is a massive, totally counterintuitive driver behind this EV adoption miracle.
Because usually when we discuss EV adoption globally, the conversation revolves around, battery chemistry.
Right. Battery chemistry, the sticker price of the car, how fast the supercharger is.
But the actual secret weapon that broke the back of gasoline dependency for the Chinese consumer was something completely outside the automotive sector.
The high-speed rail network.
This is such a phenomenal example of how distinct infrastructure systems interact with each other.
It's wild because the high-speed rail system, the HSR, it was planned and built long before EVs were even considered a viable mainstream technology.
It was just a massive civil engineering project to connect the country.
Right. Yet inadvertently, it solved the ultimate psychological barrier to EV adoption.
So let's explore that psychological barrier. If you're thinking about buying an EV, what is your biggest hesitation?
Oh, it's the fear of being stranded. You're on a rural highway, miles from home, with a dead battery.
In the West, consumers still hesitate to buy an EV even if, 95% of their driving is just a 10-mile commute to the grocery store or the office.
Yeah, they end up buying these massive gas-powered SUVs for the 5% of the time they might want to take a huge summer road trip.
They are purchasing capacity for an extreme edge case.
And they pay a massive premium for it in fuel and vehicle cost.
But the expansion of the HSR network fundamentally altered that consumer calculus. Over the past decade and a half, they built a 50,000-kilometer rail network.
50,000 kilometers?
Yeah, connecting 96% of cities with populations over 500,000. We are talking about trains running at 350 kilometers per hour.
Departing major hubs every 15 minutes, almost like subway cars.
Right. It provides this highly reliable, incredibly low cost, and super fast alternative for long-distance intercity travel.
So once that network was in place, driving a car between major cities suddenly became the least efficient way to travel.
The most exhausting and unpredictable way, yes.
Because why on earth would you sit in Golden Week traffic for 12 hours when a bullet train gets you there in 3?
Exactly the point. Because the HSR network exists and is so comprehensive, consumers realized they only needed a personal vehicle for short-haul intra-city commutes.
Taking the kids to school, running errands.
Driving to work. They no longer required massive, heavy, expensive battery packs capable of traveling 600 miles on a single charge.
They became perfectly content buying affordable, highly efficient EVs with a 150 or 200 mile range.
Because they knew they would never need to drive them between provinces.
Think of the high-speed rail network like a massive psychological safety net for the consumer economy. It actually reminds me of how cloud storage completely changed the smartphone market. Right, because 10 or 15 years ago, you probably stressed out about buying a phone with the absolute largest physical hard drive possible.
Yeah, you were terrified of running out of space for photos while on vacation.
Yeah.
Storage anxiety.
But once ubiquitous, cheap cloud storage became a reality, you suddenly felt completely comfortable buying a phone with a smaller physical hard drive. You knew the network had your back.
So the HSR is essentially the physical cloud storage for Chinese mobility.
The existence of that 50,000-kilometer rail network made consumers comfortable buying cars with limited battery ranges.
And the data supports that analogy perfectly. Research took a granular look at this, comparing cities connected to the HSR network against those that hadn't yet been integrated.
And what did they find?
They found that the expansion of high-speed rail is responsible for up to 1/3 of the entire increase in EV market share across the country.
1/3? Just from the trains?
By removing the need for long-range battery performance, the rail network essentially subsidized the EV market. Consumers outsourced their long-haul mobility to the state's rail infrastructure.
And the compounding effect of that psychological shift on global oil demand is what caught the energy markets entirely off guard.
But you know that psychological shift in the passenger market, taking all those daily commuter miles off the global oil ledger?
That's really only half the story, isn't it?
If we want to understand true structural demand destruction, we have to move away from consumer habits and look at the heavy industrial backbone.
We have to look at commercial freight.
Which brings us to the second narrative here, focusing on the sensory shift in heavy freight. We have the story of a veteran logistics driver named Lao Ma.
Right, and for decades, Lao Ma's life was completely defined by diesel.
The smell of it was essentially a permanent, gritty perfume of the Shaanxi coal routes he drove. But today, his reality is entirely different. He is sitting in the cab of his company's new heavy-duty LNG truck, liquefied natural gas.
So no more diesel smell.
The cabin smells like cheap plastic and sterile, factory-fresh upholstery. The digital dashboard glows this cool, clinical blue, tracking thermal efficiency instead of raw RPMs. His old diesel engine used to practically rattle his teeth when he was hauling loads up the Taiyang Mountains. This new machine just hums.
Almost like an oversized household appliance.
And when he pulls into a massive highway logistics hub, he sees hundreds of identical trucks sitting quietly.
Just drinking liquid gas or plugged into high-voltage electricity?
Not a single drop of black diesel in sight. He feels this profound fatigue, a sense of obsolescence, as the deafening roar of his youth is just outsourced to a silent grid.
That is such a jarring transition for an industry that has essentially operated the exact same way for a century.
And it represents a massive macroeconomic pivot. Heavy-duty trucks are universally considered the most inelastic portion of global diesel demand.
Inelastic meaning what? Consumers have to buy it regardless of price?
Right, because there is absolutely no viable substitute. I mean, you can convince a daily commuter to take a bicycle or the subway if gas gets too expensive.
But you cannot move 30 tons of steel or cement across a mountain range without burning dense liquid fossil fuel.
Or at least that was the unquestioned assumption in global logistics. But what we are witnessing now is the rapid decarbonization of the hardest to abate sector on Earth.
The numbers for early 2025 are staggering. Battery-powered electric trucks accounted for 22% of all new heavy truck sales.
Yeah, 22%.
Right. And simultaneously, the transition to LNG trucks displaced over 8% of total road diesel demand.
We are talking about erasing roughly 220,000 barrels of diesel demand every single day.
Just massive structural substitution.
Exactly. Purely through the adoption of LNG as a bridging fuel, with electric trucks accelerating right behind them.
I really need to ask a pointed question here, though, to push back a bit, just to explore the physics of this.
Sure.
Because heavy freight is universally considered the hardest sector to electrify globally, specifically because of the physics of moving massive weight.
Like the payload penalty.
If you haul a fully loaded semi-trailer, the physics require an enormous amount of energy. If you use current battery tech, you need a battery so massive and heavy that the truck uses most of its energy just to haul its own battery,
leaving very little legal weight capacity for the actual cargo you were trying to get paid to move.
So how did this specific market overcome the payload penalty so rapidly, especially when other major economies are still struggling in the pilot phase?
And the answer is this unique combination of battery swapping tech and top-down infrastructure deployment.
Let's start with the economics.
So Lauma's logistics firm didn't swap out 40 diesel haulers out of environmental altruism. They did it because the margins demanded it.
It's always about the bottom line.
EVs save fleet owners between 10 to 26% over the vehicle's lifetime compared to traditional diesel rigs.
That's a huge margin in logistics.
And the government drastically accelerated this math through highly effective trade-in programs. They offered logistics companies up to $19,000 to scrap their older, highly polluting diesel trucks.
$19,000 per truck. If you manage a fleet of 50 trucks, that incentive completely flips your balance sheet.
Right, that still doesn't solve the physics problem. The weight of the battery, or the fact that a commercial truck makes absolutely no money while it's sitting idle for 4 hours charging.
So how did they solve the downtime and the weight?
That is where the infrastructure solution comes in. CATL, the nationwide battery manufacturer, rolled out a massive battery swapping network targeting 150,000 kilometers of expressways.
Let's really break down the mechanics of a swapping station because it fundamentally changes the logistics model.
Instead of a truck pulling up to a charger and sitting idle for hours, it pulls into a dedicated swapping bay. Automated robotic arms physically unbolt and remove the depleted battery from the chassis. They slide it into a charging rack, grab a fully charged battery, and install it into the truck.
Robots just swap the whole unit out.
The entire process takes a matter of minutes.
That is faster than pumping 200 gallons of diesel into a traditional tank?
Significantly faster. And by separating the battery from the vehicle, you solve multiple problems at once.
Right. The battery is a service model.
The logistics company doesn't have to buy the battery outright, which is the single most expensive component of an EV. They buy the truck chassis, which is relatively cheap, and lease the battery capacity as an operational service,
lowering the upfront cost massively, and it solves the payload penalty.
Oh.
Well, if you are a logistics planner, you don't need to burden your truck with an enormous battery capable of traveling 1,000 kilometers.
Right.
You know, there is a battery swapping station every 100 or 200 kilometers along your dedicated freight corridor, so the truck carries a much smaller, lighter battery.
Which means the truck can legally carry more actual cargo.
It runs low, swaps the battery in 5 minutes, and gets right back on the road.
It turns the battery from a static, deadweight component into a dynamic, circulating energy commodity. And there's a massive secondary benefit for the broader energy system here. These swapping stations essentially act as giant energy storage facilities.
Oh, because they're charging all those spare batteries at once.
They charge them continuously, often at night when baseline electricity rates are at their lowest and overall grid capacity is at its highest.
Right, valley filling. It optimizes the entire national energy grid.
So you have this perfect storm of incentives. Trade-in subsidies lower the barrier to entry. Domestic electricity and natural gas are far cheaper and more stable than imported diesel.
And the battery swapping infrastructure neutralizes the operational downsides,
creating an irresistible economic proposition. They abandoned diesel at a velocity that just caught every global energy forecaster completely off guard.
Which perfectly brings us to the third massive pillar of this demand destruction.
We've grounded the passenger cars, silenced the diesel trucks.
Now we have to look up at the skies. The high-speed rail cannibalization of domestic aviation.
This is where the scale of the transition really starts to feel surreal.
The material we're analyzing introduces us to Captain Lin, a domestic airline pilot.
Anchor this scene for us.
So imagine being in his position. It's a Friday evening, and he's cruising at 30,000 feet on a flight from Beijing to Xi'an.
A route that a decade ago would have been incredibly lucrative.
Overbooked with premium paying exactly. But today, Lin is looking at a passenger manifest that is half empty.
Half empty on a Friday.
As his Airbus banks through the clouds, he knows exactly where his missing passengers are. They are 30,000 feet below him, comfortably stretched out on the Fuxing high-speed trains, gliding seamlessly at 350 kilometers per hour.
That's got to be a tough realization for a pilot.
The sky was once the ultimate symbol of rapid modernization. Now it feels irrelevant to him. He's experiencing this quiet, bloodless siege.
The intricate web of rail lines and EV superchargers suffocating the kerosene-fueled arteries of his industry.
He's capturing this creeping anxiety of piloting a gas-guzzling metal bird that a population of 1.4 billion people simply no longer truly needs.
And that creeping anxiety is grounded in incredibly stark data. I mean, to put his half-empty flight into perspective, you have to comprehend the sheer footprint of that rail network.
The 50,000 kilometers we talked about?
Right. Which represents 70% of the entire global high-speed rail infrastructure.
70% of the world's high-speed rail exists in this one country.
The direct substitutional effect this has had on domestic aviation is unprecedented. Studies show the introduction of HSR services led to a 28.2% decrease in domestic air passengers nationwide.
28.2%.
And a 24.6% drop in total flights, along with a 27.9% drop in airline seat capacity.
And those are just the national averages, right? Including long-haul flights where trains might not compete as effectively.
Right. If you zoom in on specific extreme cases, like the Wuhan-Guangzhou corridor,
a route covering over 1,000 kilometers.
Following the opening of that dedicated passenger rail line, domestic air travel on that specific route saw a massive 45% decline.
Nearly half of the aviation market just vanished into the train stations.
It makes complete sense when you think about the friction of air travel.
Absolutely. If you have a 2-hour flight, you aren't just traveling for 2 hours.
No, you travel an hour to the airport, which is outside the city. You arrive 2 hours early for security.
You deal with boarding delays, taxiing the flight, unboarding, another hour commuting from the destination airport.
Whereas a high-speed train takes you from city center to city center. You walk in, sit in a spacious seat, have reliable internet, and step off right in the heart of the destination city.
It is a vastly superior product. So when we connect this back to the global energy ledger, we see a massive cascading effect on fuel demand.
Because when an airline faces a 45% drop in demand, they don't fly empty planes.
No, they cancel the flights entirely. Millions of potential domestic flights simply do not exist,
Permanently erasing the corresponding jet fuel and kerosene consumption from the national ledger.
But I do want to provide some pushback here to deepen the analysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because it takes an enormous amount of energy and industrial output to build 50,000 kilometers of rail. I mean, the steel, the cement, the electricity. Does the construction phase negate the energy savings?
That is a very common critique. But to answer it, we have to clarify the difference between one-off domestic industrial energy use and the permanent destruction of liquid fossil fuel demand. You're entirely correct that building the physical infrastructure was immensely energy intensive. But the steel and cement used to construct those viaducts and tunnels were produced domestically. The industrial processes were powered largely by domestic coal and hydroelectric resources. That represents a massive, but ultimately one-off industrial energy expenditure.
So they executed a strategic trade.
They utilized a domestic, one-time expenditure of coal-fired energy to purchase the permanent, compounding elimination of imported, geopolitically vulnerable jet fuel and diesel.
Because once the tracks are laid, the electricity to power the trains operationally can be generated by a diverse mix of sources: hydro, wind, solar, nuclear.
And crucially, that operational power does not require a tanker ship sailing from the Persian Gulf. By shifting mobility onto an electrified grid, they systematically decouple their transportation sector from the volatility of the global oil market.
Which sets us up perfectly for the grand synthesis here, the macroeconomic transmission mechanism.
Bringing all three micronarratives together.
Right. We have Chen's silent gas station, we have Lao Ma's LNG truck and the battery swapping stations, and we have Captain Lin's half-empty Airbus.
How do these three waves of structural substitution merge to provide a global buffer?
To understand that, we need to explain exactly how marginal pricing works in global commodity markets.
It's vital to grasp this. In oil markets, the price of a barrel isn't determined by the average cost of producing all the oil in the world.
Right, Saudi Arabia might pull oil out for $3 a barrel, but they sell it for $80.
Because the price is dictated entirely by the marginal barrel. The absolute last unit of supply needed to meet the absolute last unit of global demand.
Think of the global oil market like a stadium with exactly 100,000 seats.
I like this analogy.
So if 99,000 people want to attend, tickets are cheap. Sellers know there's surplus capacity. But if exactly 100,001 people desperately want to get in,
there are only 100,000 seats.
The price of that absolute last ticket skyrockets infinitely. And that one extra person demanding a seat drives up the perceived value of every single other ticket in the entire stadium.
And that perfectly describes the setup of the 2022 energy crisis. The global oil market was facing a severe supply-side shock.
The geopolitical sanctions, the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
And coordinated OPEC plus supply cuts designed to artificially inflate prices. The supply of tickets was shrinking rapidly.
According to all historical precedent, that's the recipe for crude oil hitting $150 or $200 a barrel.
Because the world always assumed China would be the guy waiting outside the stadium, demanding more tickets no matter the price.
But reality was completely different. Precisely when the global supply was at its absolute weakest, China simply stopped adding to its liquid fuel requirements.
The demand eliminated through EVs, the trucking pivot, the HSR network, it perfectly offset the supply removed from the market.
By taking millions of people out of the stadium line, this structural shift ensured there were always empty seats available.
And that created three massive global spillovers. Central banks.
The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank. Their biggest challenge post-2022 was fighting runaway inflation.
And energy prices are the bedrock of headline inflation. If energy spikes, the cost of manufacturing, agriculture, logistics, everything spikes.
Without this structural drop in Chinese demand, crude would have breached $150 a barrel easily.
And if that happened, Western central banks would have been forced into draconian double-digit interest rate hikes.
Which would have triggered deep structural recessions in the West, mass defaults, soaring unemployment.
But this demand destruction provided cover for them. By capping imported energy inflation, it prevented oil from hitting that $150 mark, allowing economies to attempt a softer landing.
And the second spillover effect is huge for emerging markets.
For nations across South Asia, Africa, Latin America, high oil prices are economically devastating for them because oil is traded in US dollars.
If prices spike, developing nations burn through their foreign exchange reserves just to keep the lights on,
leading to sovereign debt crises and currency collapses. By suppressing global crude prices, this dynamic provided vital breathing room. It averted a wave of defaults across the global south.
Which leaves us with the third spillover, the OPEC plus dilemma.
This creates an existential crisis for petrostates. Their traditional playbook cutting supply to raise prices now yields severely diminishing returns.
Because the underlying baseline demand growth they rely on has structurally flatlined.
Right. They no longer possess the pricing power to force a sustained punitive price ceiling on the global economy.
So summarizing this permanent paradigm shift, the elasticity of oil demand relative to GDP growth in China has been permanently broken.
This is not a cyclical phase.
The sunk capital in EV infrastructure, the battery swapping networks, high-speed rail, it represents a permanent firewall against global energy hyperinflation.
The buffer is real, it is structural, and it fundamentally redefines the interconnected macroeconomics of the 21st century.